There we go. Okay, there you are. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. How's the quarantine been for you?
Same as everybody, trying to stay busy.
It's good. That's good. During this quarantine, I've learned a couple of things. So I taught myself how to juggle, actually. Is there anything you've taught yourself how to do or anything new you've learned?
Mostly DIY stuff around the house, power washing the driveway, painting my daughter's shed. We did some gardening, so growing some of our own plants and fruits and vegetables. So into horticulture now. So yeah, has been a few skills that I've added here over the last couple of months.
That's good. That's good. Okay, well, I want to start off by, I know you love stories, so I'm going to start off by telling a little story. Is that good?
Sure.
All right. So there was once a person who grew up loving sports, watching ESPN, watching Michael Jordan play, watching everyone play, and he had a great ambition to do great things in media. And so he grew up and he kept reading books and reading books and reading books. And one day he went to Syracuse and he started to learn even more and get even higher on that level. And he knew what he wanted to do. And whoop, sorry about that. And then he went on this reality TV show. And from that reality TV show, in the top three, he was able to get on ESPN. And as he said, one thing led to another. That person happens to be joining across from me right now in this call. And then there's another young man who grew up and always wanted to inspire millions of people, millions of kids, that is, that they can do anything at any age. And so this kid started off by going against other kids and speaking competitions and trying to beat kids who were double his age at the time, and just speaking competitions where you get a topic and you get 2 minutes to think about it and just go out and speak. And one day he was applying for a big organization and he called 50 different people to try to get into the NCAA tournament, and finally got a call back and he was able to get access, and he covered this NCAA tournament with to the best of his ability. And unfortunately the organization didn't really accept him, and they were kind of shocked that he did all of this just to apply to the organization. So he realized he could either quit or start his own company and do 1,000 interviews within the next 2 years, and that's exactly what he did. And that kid is me. So I think we both have really interesting journeys, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
Look forward to it.
All right, well, let's get right into it. You went to Syracuse, a proud Syracuse alum, and I've actually talked to a couple of Syracuse people. So to start off, I've talked to Coach Boeheim quite a few times. I've talked to Mike Tirico quite a few times as well, and the first time I met him was at that NCAA tournament. He went to Ann Arbor, and I'm based in Michigan, so sometimes there's a couple of Michigan events that I see him at, and the last person is Derek Coleman. So I did a nice long interview with him. So I'm assuming those guys were your friends. You know them?
I wouldn't say they're all friends, but obviously I know them. I've known Mike for a long time. DC have actually never met, but through the Syracuse connection, certainly I'm aware of him. And it's funny, I am friends and pretty good friends with Jim Boeheim's sister, but obviously I've covered Boeheim quite a bit, both at ESPN and when I worked in Syracuse and when I was a student at SU.
All right. So tell me about this. Um, of all the different teams you've been able to cover in college basketball, what would you say is one of your favorite cultures? Like, I know one thing that I've been able to see by covering so many different college teams is the different cultures, and they're all so interesting. What would you say is one of your favorite college teams to cover?
When you mean culture, do you mean tradition, atmosphere? Are you talking about coaching culture? What do you mean by culture?
All of it, like all of it. Um, everything is different, in like the coaching style is different, the atmosphere is different, the culture is different, everything's different. Um,
Yeah, there's a few that jump out. I think from a pure atmosphere standpoint, Fog Allen is the best place that I've called a game. Allen Fieldhouse to me is 1A, and then right there, a notch below, is Cameron Indoor at 1B. At Fog, I did a Kansas-Texas game years ago, and you walk in and you've got the Memorial to Naismith, and, that's where basketball started. And you see the sign, all who enter pay heed, beware of the fog. And then the floorboards shake before the game when everybody does rock, chalk, Jayhawk. On top of that, Texas was in town, so you had a pretty big rivalry game, Texas, Kansas. Both happened to be ranked at the time, sellout crowd. Texas had won in Austin. So it was just an unbelievably charged atmosphere. And, by the way, that was a Kansas team with Joel Embiid and Andrew Wiggins and Wayne Selden. So pretty loaded Kansas team on top of that. So that's the best atmosphere game day that I've been to. Cameron certainly is special. But from a culture standpoint, it's different. I think sometimes when you find a program on the rise and you can sort of see the seeds of something about to blossom, and that was probably Virginia. I remember covering Tony Bennett in his earlier years at UVA, and you sensed, hey, this guy had success at Washington State before, a school that hadn't had success in a long time. He had success at Virginia, a school, again, that had spurts, but really wasn't on the national scene since the days of Ralph Sampson in the early and mid-'80s. And the way he was able to bring it back, I thought more than anything, the way he stayed true to his vision. We're going to be a defensive first team, but also efficient on offense. And too many people looked at Virginia for a long time when they had some of these early tournament exits as high seeds and said, well, they're just a defense team. Their style doesn't translate into the NCAA tournament. Listen, they got some bad draws. Michigan State and Tom Izzo are as tough to beat as anybody come March, and they ran into Michigan State a couple of times. UMBC, that's not excusable, but their best player, their most talented player, who ends up being a lottery pick, was injured, DeAndre Hunter. And then the following season with Hunter and Ty Jerome and Kyle Guy, we saw this kind of miraculous run. But I thought more than anything, that was a culmination of a culture already being in place. And now they have the right pieces, and you catch a couple of breaks. And then I thought this past season, which we never saw finish out to fruition, was one of his better coaching jobs. You look at the talent they lost. They lost 3 pros. You lost Jerome. You lost Guy. You lost Hunter. And you had to recalibrate. You didn't have the scoring that they did. And yet still they're finishing near the top of the ACC. They were going to go back to the NCAA tournament. And they were going to be dangerous because, again, defense is a staple of their culture. That travels. So to see the renaissance of Virginia has been fascinating to watch, especially, having covered the ACC quite a bit the last 5 years.
For sure. I can tell you, Cameron Indoor, I don't know how you see it, but I know when I'm sitting there, when everyone's right up against your back, and sometimes when they're cheering, you get just a lays of spit all over you. So to me, that was definitely an interesting atmosphere to be in, but it's something that I've never seen. And then you go and cover North Carolina just 8 miles away, and it's so much of a more spacious, modern type arena. So that was really interesting to me. And I think the story that you were talking about, Virginia, their defense, I think Mamadi Diakite does a really great job for them now, for sure. And I've actually covered more ACC. I'm in Big Ten country, so I've covered more ACC, though, than I have Big Ten. I've covered 6 teams between basketball and football: Duke, North Carolina. I've covered some Notre Dame football. So a lot of different teams in the ACC. Tell me, if the NCAA tournament happened this year, this was a year full of upsets, what do you think the outcome would be? Do you think that there would be a lot of upsets again, or, how do you think that would go?
Yeah, to be honest, I have no idea. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I would know the answer to that question because the season was so unpredictable. The Big Ten, as deep as it was, who's that alpha in that league? I mean, how good were the top teams relative to the best teams in the country? How good was Gonzaga, which hadn't been tested, again, in conference play? The ACC, I thought, had 3 Final Four teams potentially in Louisville, Duke, and Florida State. But the rest of the conference was probably as weak as it's ever been. And then you saw just the unpredictability of the season. Auburn, Kentucky out of the SEC. I think it would have been a total crapshoot. I think it would have been probably one of the most entertaining first 2 weekends that we've seen in a long time, just because you probably have a double-digit seed getting into the Elite Eight, maybe even a couple. You probably have a team seeded 7th or lower crashing the Final Four party. And to me, this was a season more than any other where you really needed to see the bracket and you needed to see the matchups. That would probably determine how this thing plays out. But this was one year where, again, I think even all the pundits would sit back and say, yeah, I can tell you, hey, it's going to be Duke or it's going to be Florida State because of their depth. But I think at the end of the day, man, this would have been a wild year, and it wouldn't stun me if you had somebody kind of out of the woodworks like a San Diego State or a Dayton, get to the Final Four and maybe even be the last team standing.
For sure. Now, North Carolina, this year was a team that kind of was set back a little bit. Next year, how do you think that team's going to be able to recover and kind of jump back up to the Tar Heels that we know?
Well, again, I think you got to remember a couple of things. One is Roy Williams' best teams in North Carolina have not been built on freshmen. They've all been upperclassmen-laden teams. You look at his first championship team, Sean May and Ellington and Felton. All those guys were juniors and seniors. You look at his second championship team, right, with Lawson and Hansborough. Again, those teams were upperclassmen heavy. The Stars were all juniors and seniors. Even the team that won their most recent championship, again, another veteran team. So he has won with older guys. He's won with guys who stay 2-3 years, not necessarily the one and done model. What I think is interesting is he's got such a dynamic freshman class coming in, one of the best recruiting classes in the country. And now he's got some pieces and some holdovers from this past year where they took their lumps. But again, I thought had a little bit of juice late in the season, which gives you some hope. So if the younger guys continue to get better and now have experience, you bring in some talented freshmen, I would expect North Carolina to be a top 3 team in the ACC. Last year, I think more than anything, was kind of a perfect storm of inexperience, and then obviously losing your best player for a long stretch in Cole Anthony. That's going to impact any team. But when you just don't have the supporting cast that you do and the supporting cast that you're accustomed to, it hurt a little bit more. And now guys had to do maybe more than they were capable of. But with the freshman class he has coming in, I think Carolina, again, last year was more of a blip and an aberration than a sign of things to come.
And I remember that North Carolina Duke game. I was there covering that with that thriller. It's actually a funny story. We were driving up from Michigan, and in Virginia, I don't know how many times you've been through Virginia in a car, but there's so many unmarked cars, and you go 10 miles above the speed limit, and you get a speeding ticket from an unmarked car. So I don't know how many stories you have like that from being on the road, but I'll tell you, going to that game in Virginia, that was a tough place.
Virginia has a lot of speed traps. So, yes, I have been busted for one speeding ticket in Virginia. I'm more careful now in the South because in the Northeast, one of my best friends is a police officer. So I have literally a gold-plated card that says I'm a family member. So if I was driving in New Jersey, New York, or Connecticut, I've been pulled over many times for speeding, and I would just hand them the card, and they'd look at it, and they'd say, "Be careful, sir. Have a nice day," and get off without incident. But yeah, Virginia will get you. Virginia will certainly get you.
I'll tell you a couple more stories. When we were in New York City, I don't know what my dad was doing. He was looking at something, and he was driving. We hit a bump, got a flat tire right in New York City at about 10, 11 at night. So we had to pull into like a helicopter station. This was like right after I had 3 meetings that day with CBS Sports executives. And so right after that, we were hoping to enjoy New York City a little bit, and that flat tire got us. And another time actually going to North Carolina, North Carolina, we got in a car crash in West Virginia. So basically it was really bad roads. We were going about 50 miles per hour on the highway, and just one little patch of black ice. We did a couple of 360s right into the guardrail facing oncoming traffic. So we lucked out. There was no one coming in at that time, but that place is tough to drive too.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I love about being able to do media is every interview I do, I feel like I learn something. So whether I'm interviewing a college player or an NFL or NBA guy, you learn something different about everyone and you take something from that interview. What would you say is one of your favorite both interviews or one of your favorite places to call a game?
My favorite interview, it's funny, actually happened about 16 years ago. I was a senior in college, and I was fortunate enough to interview Salman Rushdie in a closed setting. And just fascinating. And I don't know how much you know about Rushdie's backstory. This guy is one of the best authors of the 20th century. The Satanic Verses, when it came out, was so controversial. The Ayatollah of Iran had put a fatwa on his head, which essentially is a decree that any living Muslim, if they see Salman Rushdie, it's their duty to kill him. And he was in hiding for a long time. And he came to speak at Syracuse University, and I'd always been a big fan of his work. Shalimar the Clown, Midnight's Children, the Satanic Verses. And I remember there was this closed setting, and I was the student representative from my class who got to go interview him. And it was me and about 5 other people. And it was funny. A lot of people kind of wanted to ask him about current events. And, we weren't that far removed from 9/11 and the current climate of the world. And, I was an English minor. And for me, the literary appeal of interviewing Rushdie mattered more than anything. And I remembered, how he opened the Satanic Verses. And, the first line was about a guy falling out of a plane. And it was something along the lines of, you have to be willing to die in order to really feel alive, something along those lines. And, I remember asking him that. And I said, in hindsight, when you wrote that, how autobiographical does that feel? And he kind of chuckled, and we got into this nice long conversation about that book. And he really wanted to talk about the literary aspect and about writing and, where he comes up with these characters and these storytelling devices. And so, for me, as somebody who was a big fan of his work, of all the interviews I've done in my life, that was the one I think that hits home the most. That was the one where I was probably the most starstruck. I think when you interview athletes and you interview coaches, I mean, that's kind of part of your job. So, we're not really in the business of, hey, I interviewed a guy, let's take a picture with him to show people I do it, but Rushdie was kind of out of my arena, even though I was covering sports. That was probably, one of the, I think, boy, since college, I think I've only asked for 2 autographs, and Rushdie was one of them, and he signed my book. And then the other one was this past year, Walter Isaacson, another one of my favorite authors, was at a football game at Tulane, and he'd written biographies on Steve Jobs and Da Vinci and Einstein and Ben Franklin. And I got to meet him for 15, 20 minutes before the game, and I got him to sign my Einstein book. So, I think sometimes when you're in sports for so long, people forget and think that's all we do and we don't have other interests. And those are the interviews sometimes that have more meaning to me personally than the athletes who I cover, because you can't be starstruck by the people you cover. You can't be in awe and totally deferential to the people you cover. You've got to be fair. You're not serving their interest. You're serving the interest of your audience. But this was one of those situations where I felt I could serve my interest because I wanted to learn about writing, and I wanted to learn about the craft, and I wanted to learn about what makes a good story. And I had a chance to sit down with one of the best authors of the 20th century.
Yeah, and I'll say for me, I've gotten to talk to a couple of people in the entertainment industry, like Snoop Dogg and Dirk Bentley, and some other singers and actors. Just a couple, maybe just a handful. But the thing about me that I always try to do, no matter if I'm not doing an interview, even when I was little, I always treat the person, whether they're famous or not, the same, just because um, to me, they all come from the same roots and they're all still people. They come from the same background. And so I just try to treat them the same and try to aspire to maybe be like them one day. So that's how I normally look at famous people. And but I will say it's a lot of fun to sometimes do an entertainment industry versus always doing sports, because you get to talk about other things that you're interested in for sure. So yeah, that's great. Now tell me about some of your hobbies. What are your favorite things to do?
Well, I play tennis in my free time when I have it. Hopefully, our courts here locally are open. Workout, I read. Um, and it's not just about sports. I think that's kind of the thing that, like I was just telling you, people will, tell us very often, hey, stick to sports, stick to sports. You'd be surprised how many people in our industry go beyond sports and like things outside of sports and like to read about things outside of sports. And I think that's what makes you better at contextualizing sports. If you have an appreciation of pop culture and literature and history and socioeconomics, the more arrows you have in your quiver, the better equipped you are to contextualize what's going on in the present. So, those are kind of the things that I like to do. I've got a young daughter. I like to spend time with her. I like seeing the world through the prism of her eyes and teaching her and learning with her and spending time with her and, relearning things that I had learned in my childhood. So, I think all those things matter a lot to me. Being a dad is something that's really important to me. And so, that has kind of been on the forefront the last 2.5 years. So that puts some of the other hobbies to the side for the time being. But, I'm into movies and certainly some good television. And obviously, sports is a big part of my life. But, there are things like you said, outside of it too.
Now I have a question about you. You used to, do a little bit more of in-studio work, analyzing, and now you've gone to play-by-play and, being sort of calling games. Is that something normal for people to do, or because you kind of stepped away from the on-camera side and now calling play-by-play? Is that something normal for journalists to do, or were you one of the rare ones?
It's different for everybody. I really wanted to do play-by-play when I was in college, and I loved doing it. Television gave me an opportunity, to fast track a little bit. I started in local news, working local television in Yakima, Washington, Syracuse, New York. And, I was fortunate by 25, 26, I was at ESPN and, working for ESPN News and filling in on Sports Center and doing college football live and, really had a studio track and being a host and an anchor. And, there were a lot of aspects of that job that I loved, the writing part of it, certainly. And then an opportunity came about to do play-by-play, and it started with lacrosse. And that was a sport that I had covered in college. I still followed. I became a fan of it in college. And so they said, hey, do you want to do a lacrosse game? And I said, sure. I'd love to. If somebody calls in sick, let me know. I'll be there and I'll do it, half joking. And my boss was, hey, I'll work you in. We'll get you a game. And so we did one game. They liked what they heard. And then they offered me a handful of football games that fall. And I took it. And all of a sudden I got the itch. And we made the decision to move down to Charlotte, where the ESPNU studios were located. And that would allow me to grow as a play-by-play announcer. I would still do some studio. And in the beginning, it was more studio than play-by-play. And we had this understanding that we would slowly transition. And, about 3 years ago, I found I was doing 75, 80% play-by-play and only 20% studio. And when I signed a new contract, I said, hey, can we do full-time play-by-play? And they said, we were going to ask you the same question. And so then I just kind of made that leap into doing games. But it was a process. And certainly I didn't have the reps on the play-by-play front initially that other folks did. So probably that learning curve was a little longer. But there's nothing like the adrenaline rush from being at a live event and calling a game. And I actually think, again, in this business, so many skills intersect. When you're in studio and when you're hosting and when you're anchoring, you're global and you kind of have to be aware of everything. And then on a play-by-play level, you have to be really micro in terms of your preparation, but the best guys are global as well. And they're able to take what's happening within their game, fit it into the larger context of the sport. So having that studio background really helps, and it really helps the way you can shape a narrative and frame a game. So I think, again, having done studio may be a better play-by-play guy, and vice versa. Having done games, where now I'm embedded on a micro level and I've had these conversations with players and coaches on site, that makes me better in studio when I need to draw from a specific or to follow up with an analyst to get the best out of them, to get more information out of them, or to put a period on a story, or again, just to add a little bit more information to our viewers.
That's great. Now, did you play any sports growing up? Did you play lacrosse, football, basketball?
Yeah, I played basketball. I played baseball. I played tennis. I actually didn't play lacrosse. I didn't even know what lacrosse really was until I got to college. My high school didn't have it. Never played it. I think we had one day in gym class. We had plastic sticks and a wiffle ball, and then we pretended to play lacrosse. And that was my exposure to lacrosse. And when I got to Syracuse, we all wanted to cover football and college basketball, and men's lacrosse was the third biggest sport on campus. This was a perennial Final Four team when I got there. They were in the midst of a run where they'd been to 22 straight Final Fours. In my 4 years there, they lost in the national championship game, won a national championship, lost in the Final Four, and won the national championship. So, we're talking about Syracuse and Johns Hopkins, the two top programs in the history of the sport. And so it was a big deal. I mean, they would get, 7,000, 8,000 at the Carrier Dome for a big game, which is, a huge crowd for lacrosse. So I learned it. I learned the rules. I would go to high school games locally. It was a huge high school sport. All the local TV stations covered the high school players because they would all go on, and many of them would play at Syracuse or play against Syracuse as D1 athletes. And I learned it. And we had a transcendent player who had his 4 years overlap with mine by the name of Mike Powell. And Mike Powell was to lacrosse. You should look up his YouTube videos. He was Pete Maravich. He was Wayne Gretzky. He was Magic Johnson. This guy was a magician. He would break ankles and then wait for you to get up and then break your ankles again, and was this incredible showman who every time he picked up a stick, it was you're waiting for something special to happen. And there was a magical moment there. 4-time attackman of the year. He won the Heisman of lacrosse twice. And so when you see a player of that caliber, you go from not just covering the sport, you start becoming a fan of it. And I became a lifelong fan of it. And so I continued to watch it and follow it even after I graduated. And when the opportunity came at ESPN, it was almost seamless to just jump right in and cover the sport again.
Now, my question for you is, what do you think about having a kid as a sports sideline reporter on national TV, like as a kid? What do you think about that idea?
Well, here's the thing. I think you have to find something that's unique about you and that people are going to want besides, hey, I'm a kid. So if somebody says, hey, what are you bringing to the table? What do you add that we don't have? Because there'd be a lot of people who say, well, he's not as experienced. He is not as well versed. He hasn't been to college yet. So you're competing with folks who are in the business. If you want to be a national sideline reporter, whether it's for NFL or college football. So you have to say, I got to bring something unique to the table, which is more than just, hey, I'm 12 or 13 or 14 years old. What is it that I bring that is truly unique? What perspective that can I offer that is different? What am I asking that is different than what's being asked right now? I'm going to cower when Bill Belichick blows me off, or if Nick Saban doesn't want to talk to me, or Mike Leach runs away. So, those are questions that you have to be willing to answer. And those are the questions if, again, you're coming to me and saying, hey, I want to do this. My question is, what are you bringing that we don't already have? And to me, it has to be a skill and it's got to be a talent. It can't just be, hey, put me on TV because I'm a kid.
No, not at all. And I'll tell you what I bring to the table. It's a lot of times when I talk to an athlete or a coach, I'm able to bring a different perspective, not just being a kid, but I can sometimes bring out the fun side of them by asking certain questions. Like, for example, when I went to Duke, I did a funny face contest with some of the players, so R.J. Barrett, Trey Jones, and Jack White. And the reason why I would be able to pull that off is if you think of, like, an adult media person asking that question, like, give me your funniest face, that would be a little bit strange, but I think it kind of works when you're a kid to be able to bring that fun side out. And I will tell you, for the past 2 years, I've taken on a lot of obstacles. Like, security guards are really brutal to me. So when I was covering the Final Four last year, I had access to one of the days, I think it was that Friday, and a security guard, after the Zion Williamson press conference, I showed her my badge. She took my phone away and started deleting my pictures just for no reason. And so I talked to another security guard. She was wrong to just snatch my phone and start deleting that. And then they wouldn't let me, go back in the press conference and keep sitting in there. So that's one thing. When we were at Alabama, when we were So this year we went on a 35-hour road trip to first we went to Atlanta to cover LSU Oklahoma. Then we drove, that was a 12-hour drive. Then we drove another 7 hours to Orlando to cover Alabama and Michigan. And at the Alabama team hotel, we were just in there talking to some people, and the security guard said, "You don't have a right to be in here. Get out of here. Don't talk to me." So we got out, and we told him this is a public hotel. We're allowed to be here. So the next day we came back, and the next day we came back. So those are the obstacles that I go through that I've had to learn to overcome. And since a lot of times I don't get access, when I went on that road trip, I didn't have a single access, no media, anything. So I had to, like I said, just hang around the hotels, stand outside stadiums all night pretty much, and just wait for someone to come out and try to interview them and get my work in that way. On the way back, we stopped in Kentucky and covered that game again with no access. And so those are kind of the obstacles I go through.
Yeah, listen, it's not going to be easy, but there is a grind involved in making it in this business, and we face different versions of that. I think at different ages. I think you being 13, being taken seriously, certainly will be a challenge for you. But again, I think it goes back to you say you want to be a sideline reporter. There is certainly a journalistic and a reporting aspect that's involved there. How well versed are you on reporting injuries? How well versed are you in breaking news? How well versed are you in, again, asking the tough questions, whether it's halftime or post game. Hey, why did you go for it on fourth down with a 6-point lead from your own 35-yard line? And so that is where there is the actual hard-hitting reporting comes in. And so it can't just be the funny faces, which again can be done as a featurette. So all those things kind of factor into play. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I think you have to also realize, like, you're going to be competing with people who are not just in the business, but they've been in the business for a long time and have, again, more experience than you. And so you got to prepare yourself and work at your craft. Because that is, again, if I'm reading this right, that's who you want to compete with.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I want to do. And I'll tell you the hard-hitting questions. I asked Coach Self right in the middle of the whole investigation that he had at the beginning of this year. I asked him a question about, as kids, we're told if we do something wrong, we own up to it. And if we don't do anything wrong, we have nothing to worry about. During this whole investigation, what would you say to those kids? And he said, it's not necessarily that you did something wrong. It's just you wish you would have presented yourself differently, because sometimes you say something and people get all over it. And he said, you just sometimes wish you would have presented yourself differently, even if you didn't do anything wrong. So I'm definitely prepared to do all that. It's the grind, and it's getting that chance. And so, that's what I'm trying to prove. Well, now it's time for the flip the switch. So this is a segment I do with pretty much most of the people I interview. And so I have the person I'm interviewing interview me. So you're a journalist. Your time to interview me.
I'm interviewing you for this?
Yeah.
What made you want to get into this business?
Well, I wanted to always inspire millions of kids, even before when I was 9 or 10 years old. I wanted to find a way as a kid to inspire millions of kids. And so at first I thought it would be through maybe the speaking circuit. So I was doing speech competitions, and I thought maybe I'll go that route. And then, like I was telling you at the beginning of the interview, I applied for an organization, and I made so many 50 phone calls to be able to cover the NCAA tournament. I did it, hit it off, and the organization declined me. So I started my own company from there, and I realized this could be the perfect way to inspire millions of kids, because it's never been done before. We've never seen another kid on national TV as a sports sideline reporter, and those millions of kids need to be inspired. And so that's my only motivation.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, listen, I really appreciate the time. I wish you well. Hope you take care, and let's stay in touch. And if you can mention anyone about me, I would really appreciate that. as I worked my way up to being that first kid on national TV.
Good luck to you. Pleasure chatting with you. Take care.
Take care.